Hello and welcome to the Quarantined Wargamer. I'm Big Lee, and as you may have noticed, I'm not in my operations room. So as quarantine rules get slowly relaxed in the UK, museums have started to reopen, and although we won't be travelling on public transport to get into central London and do museums like the British Museum, I am persuaded to get out into those smaller museums, particularly English heritage sites, which we're a member of, because as you can see, there's hardly anyone around. We've got plenty of space for social distancing, and it's quite relaxed, and in fact it's nice and cool today. It's been very hot the last week. So we're at Tilbury Fort, and as I say, the rules are being relaxed and we're getting out and about more. Don't worry, it's not the end of the Quarantined Wargamer. While I may not be as quarantined as I have been over the last few months, some rules are still in place, and let's face it, COVID's not over yet. It hasn't had the last laugh yet. So we could well see some restrictions being reimposed. We don't know. So until things get back to proper normal, the Quarantined Wargamer is still going to be going good and strong. So Tilbury Fort was known as the West Tilbury Blockhouse, or Thermitage Blockhouse. It consisted of links defences with Gravesend Fort across the river, and there was also a river boom at one point, and guns at East Tilbury. The first fort was built here by Henry VIII and reinforced for the Armada. In fact, Elizabeth I visited here. Used again in the English Civil War and enlarged during the Anglo-Dutch Wars into its present star-shaped defensive works. It was later used as a gunpowder store and a depot for the army. Extra batteries were added during the Napoleonic period. But by World War II, its use was slowly falling out as technologies moved on, and it ended up becoming a logistical hub for moving men and material around. During the Second World War, it had a very limited use because downriver there was an anti-sub boom and more defences, and of course the Monsell forts out in the estuary. The site is now run by English Heritage. We've been here loads of times, so it's sort of quite a familiar place for us. So anyway, let's go and take a look around. So here we are up on the ramparts of Tilbury Fort, and as you can see down here, you've got the second row of guns right down at the water's edge. There was another row the other side of the fort, but that's now gone. But these are fairly well preserved, so you'd have had another row of guns down there. Back here in the distance, you can see rather appropriately, given that we're in the middle of a pandemic, is the World's End pub. Now that used to be the ferry's main building. The ferry over to Gravesend on the other side of the river is a little bit further, about 100 yards or so further down the river at the moment. And then over on this side you've got a really good view of the twin moats surrounding the fort. The outer one is currently filled with silt, unfortunately, and the inner one is still flooded. Now the site was, the star-shaped design was actually designed by a gentleman called Bernard de Gom in the Dutch style, and is now considered one of the best examples of a star-shaped fort left still existing in the UK at the moment. So we're inside one of Tilbury's powder magazines, and there's a lot of those inside the raised embankments around the walls of the castle, or the fort rather, sorry. And they're very cool, they're very dark, and when they were in use there would have been a very strict regime for the control of personnel coming in and out, because obviously there would have been a great danger of explosion. So people coming in here wouldn't have been allowed to wear anything with metal, so no hobnail boots. They would in fact change into felt boots and overalls, and basically anything that might cause a spark wasn't allowed in here. In fact, as you can see from the glass pane here, they would even keep the lighting the other side of effectively a shield, so that even it would have been gas or oil lamps, they were kept separate where they couldn't cause an explosion in these casemates here, because you can imagine that would be absolutely disastrous. Now this is common in this sort of era with gunpowder being stored in casemates underground, and you see that at lots of other places. I've seen it at Gravesend, Fort, all sorts of places from this sort of time period. So these are Napoleonic era gunpowder casemates, whereas some of the fort dates obviously a lot earlier than that. Anyway, we're going to continue. So we're in what is like a long gallery that connects various powder stores in small separate compartments, and this runs the whole length of this particular casemate. And as you can see, it's quite long. It slopes down, so it's very low. It's very cool in here, which is just what you want when you're storing a volatile material like gunpowder. It's also very nice on a warm day like today, particularly when you've got to wear face masks and you're getting a little bit steamy. Some small quantities of shells and cartridges were moved into small rooms directly beneath the guns, so they could actually pass them up through the hole that you see there in the ceiling. They would be hoisted up to where the gun positions were. And this room would have stored shells on wooden flooring along one side and the cartridge cases on the other side. So we're in some of the gun positions directly above the gunpowder and shell store that I showed you earlier, and you remember we saw there was a hatch, a hole in the ceiling so they could pass the shells and the cartridges up. Well, that would have come up into a small room here. The hoist would have come up into here. There's some of these along next to all of the gun positions here, so they could feed up the cartridges and the shells, and then the crew that was in this position with their gun could then get one piece of ammunition at a time. And so it kept this area as free of ammunition as possible, literally only what they were using at the time. And it would be constantly fed up, and the crew would be taking that from those side rooms to the gun positions. So this is one of the gun positions. There'd been a 9-inch muzzle loading gun in this position, and you can still see the metal rail that they would have used to be able to traverse the gun so that it could command a view down the river, and that's the whole point of this fort. It gives the fort a commanding position of any ships trying to come down the river. Anyone foolish enough to try and sail down there would have come under continuous and sustained fire from this fort, Gravesend, and various other batteries that are positioned along the river. So I should have mentioned this earlier. These were muzzle loading guns, but they were rifled, which means they had rifling on the inside of the barrel. And if you remember the shells that we saw in the casemate downstairs, they had sort of lumps on the sides. That's how those shells would have sort of locked into the rifling inside the muzzle, so that when they were fired they span, and it gave them stability during flight, and meant that they could fire further and more accurately. So there are not many gun left back in the site, and I'm not even sure if this is an original from here or whether it's been brought in. It's an actual cannon. You know, it's not a replica, but I don't know if it was originally belonged here or not. But as you can see, this gun's pointing inland, because of course this fort was designed to protect it, not just from to defend the river, but was also designed to be protected against a land attack. And so you had 2 rows of water-filled ditches, and as you can see, one of the few entrances out there would have been commanded by the guns along this part of the battery. So the guns, the style design was designed to repel land-based invaders trying to attack the fort, as well as defend the river. So during the interwar years, this was mostly a supply depot. But when the Second World War started, they put some impromptu anti-aircraft defences here, and in fact the site was actually bombed on a couple of occasions, and a row of houses were destroyed here. But there was also barracks, and the place was defended against parachute attacks. So it continued to have albeit a limited use during the Second World War. But once the Second World War was over, the site was pretty much mothballed and fell out of use, until eventually it was taken over by English Heritage and is now a museum. Inside the courtyard at Tilbury Fort, we've got a 3.7-inch AA gun and various other pieces. I don't believe any of them are original, but they're here, so they're interesting to look at, although it has to be said there's not a lot of information on them. This is one of the better preserved pieces, if you can believe that. So these are the officers' quarters here. You may recognise them because they featured in the background during one of the episodes of Sharp with Sean Bean. Indeed, they used this site a couple of times to represent a training depot, trying to make a whole battalion out of half a dozen actors. There is a little museum in one of the houses over there. Unfortunately it's closed, obviously because of quarantine rules, and they haven't got enough volunteers for that. But one of the houses is still lived in because the curator of this site lives in the fort. So actually that's a pretty cool perk of the job, I think. Well, I hope you found that interesting. There's loads more to find out, so please come and visit the site. It's a really interesting little museum, lots of places to walk around, and particularly at this time when we're all trying to be socially distanced, plenty of space. I mean, there's been a lot of visitors here, more than I normally see when we come and visit, but there's tons of room for everybody. So there's room for the kids to run around and places to picnic. So a really worthwhile day out, particularly at the moment when we're all having to abide by social distancing rules of one kind or another. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, please consider, hit the like button, and please consider subscribing to my channel. You can always unsubscribe later when I get on your nerves. And of course, please leave comments in the section below or over on my blog, Big Lee's Miniature Adventures. So until next week, keep rolling high.